Hello and welcome to Lost Love Chronicles. I'm Joe. I was 8 when my parents and I were in a major car accident. My parents died and I suffered a traumatic brain injury. I mostly recovered, but something inside me, however, was different. I seemed to have lost my conscience or the ability to feel guilt. I was raised by my father's brother and his wife. They had no children of their own and devoted their lives and love to me. My aunt tried to explain how the brain injury affected my feelings and behavior and that I had to be on my guard not to give in to violence or meanness. They didn't shower me with money, but with all the love two people could possibly give a child. They were the two sweetest, kindest, most loving people on earth. When I was 13 and had my appendix removed, they took turns staying up all night with me in the hospital and for the next few days at home. That's the kind of love that money can't buy. I suppose that was the most important lesson they could have ever taught me. Money can't buy love, and love will always trump money. They drove Toyota Camrys, not expensive sports cars. No one would have confused us with rich people. I certainly never did, but we were comfortable and had everything we needed. We lived in a 3,000 square foot house. It wasn't a mansion. It was just a nice big house in an upper middle class neighborhood where the local kids felt at home playing the newest and unreleased video games that my uncle brought home from work. In return, we had to answer questions about the games to the market research team that my uncle brought home to interview us all. On the last day of school in June, where I was the smallest kid in 7th grade, Eric, the biggest kid, demanded my lunch money. He was holding hands with Susan, who before that day had been my girlfriend. I refused and he beat the crap out of me for a good 10 minutes. Susan laughed at me. I was black and blue, limping and in pain for more than a week from the beating. My aunt took me to the hospital and phoned the police. The police took my statement. The next day they told my parents that according to Eric and Susan, I fell down a flight of stairs and was just jealous of Eric and wanted to get him in trouble. The police lost interest and nothing happened after that. I learned not to rely on the police to solve my problems. My uncle insisted that a man has to learn to defend himself and fight his own battles if he wanted to keep his self-respect. I spent the summer swimming laps every morning and going to a boxing and weightlifting gym every afternoon. I was the only kid there. Everyone else was a present or former prize fighter. By the end of the first week, I was black and blue all over. By the end of the summer, I had great stamina, knew how to box with the best of them, and had added over 10 pounds of new muscles to back myself up. In September, I was actually looking forward to again seeing Eric. Walking home after school on the first school day, he cornered me and demanded my money. I pretended to be afraid. As he leaned in to steal my wallet from my pocket, I hit him in his nose with a strong right hook. He looked at me stunned. Blood dripped from his broken nose as my left fist tore into his stomach. I couldn't stop myself and kept hitting him until he fell to the ground and begged me to stop while he picked up 2 of his teeth from the cement. I was in such good shape that I wasn't even winded. I was so amped up that it took all the self-control I could muster not to kill him, as I could hear my aunt's voice in my head begging me to stop. Believe me, I was physically and emotionally capable of killing him. I felt no guilt or sorrow. I warned Eric to tell his parents and police that now he had fallen down a flight of stairs. If the police bothered me, I would come back to Eric and finish the job. No one would ever again make me a victim. If they tried, they would suffer the consequences. The next day in school, Susan tried to make up with me. I laughed in her face and told her to go and kiss her toothless boyfriend. She called me a psycho and ran away. She might have been right. I don't seem to have a conscience or feel guilt. But my aunt convinced me to never be the first to harm someone. However, if they first harmed me, I threw the rule book out of the window. When my aunt and uncle met and fell in love, he was employee number 8 and his wife was employee number 10 in what is now one of the world's largest software companies. They were frugal, unassuming people who lived within their modest salaries. Their salaries weren't extravagant, but the value of their stock options was astronomical. As a teenager, I learned that they were the 99th wealthiest couple in the United States, based on their stock holdings. They were also the happiest couple I'd ever met. I once asked them why they didn't buy a yacht or multiple vacation homes. My aunt explained that if they thought that buying yachts and jets would bring them more happiness, then they would buy them. Instead, they made many generous and anonymous contributions to a lot of charities and people in need. Whenever the local TV station ran a story about a family struggling with hospital bills for a sick child, my aunt and uncle would anonymously pay their bills. Helping other people brought them the most happiness. I didn't just love them, I worshipped them. They viewed money like they viewed alcohol. A little bit was great, but getting addicted to either was dangerous to your soul. Their idea of a really exciting time was a backyard barbecue with their coworkers, with my uncle wearing a ridiculous chef's hat as he tended to the grill and my aunt having us all sing along as she played folk songs on her guitar. Their guests rarely had as much money as my aunt and uncle, but lived in mansions with yachts and private jets with their third trophy spouses. As I got to know them, I understood that my aunt was right. These people were no happier than my family and some were actually miserable. I remember one adorable girl, Missy, who was 5 years younger than I was. When we were alone, she cried about her third and newest trophy stepmom, who who hated her. Hearing that broke my heart. I was 17 and about to leave for college. She was 12. She was much too young to date. I pulled my aunt aside and told her about Missy. She hugged and tried to comfort the young girl as Missy cried in her arms. I left for college and Missy and my aunt became close. My aunt taught Missy to play guitar. Missy missed her bio mom. My aunt missed me, and they comforted each other. I graduated Stanford with a major in finance. I became a stockbroker, with just my aunt and uncle as clients. I was still the top broker in my company. My aunt wanted me to date Missy, but I couldn't date a girl still in high school without going to prison. My secretary, Shirley, and I fell in love then married. We were both 22. My uncle loved her. My aunt insisted that she sign a prenup. Have I mentioned that my aunt was a little smarter and more cynical than my uncle? We honeymooned for 2 weeks in Hawaii. Neither of us had ever been there before. We had a great time both in and out of bed. The more time was spent in bed. Shirley came from a poor family and enjoyed the financially good life we were living, much more than I did. I just took it for granted. My brokerage practice expanded with my uncle's fellow employees as clients. I was pretty good at investing their money. I was working long hours researching various investments for them. I loved driving to work and home with my wife each day, though sometimes I had to work late and she left without me. Stan, a fellow broker, would sometimes drive Shirley home. Stan and his wife Ethel were good friends of ours. Stan taught Shirley and me to scuba dive. Shirley and I came to love it so much that we bought a used 42-foot Sea Ray which I docked at a ritzy yacht club in Marina del Rey. We would spend the weekend at the dock on the boat and then go out scuba diving. The boat was big enough that Stan and Ethel would often sleep over in the second cabin too. It was our vacation home. Many times, I took out the boat with Shirley or alone. I'm not naive and always kept an eye on my wife looking for any signs of infidelity. She never gave me a reason to doubt her, but I do have a little paranoia, I guess. My aunt and uncle died within 2 months of each other, and while I was still in mourning, my wife became distant from me. I didn't notice right away because I was too consumed by my grief. I wasn't playing with a full deck for months after their deaths. When I drove in their old neighborhood, I would absently-mindedly look to see if they were walking on the street or driving by. Then I'd come back to reality remembering that they were dead and I'd cry. I missed them so much. Shirley understood how much money I had inherited and wanted to immediately start wasting it on luxury cars, diamonds, a mansion, and extravagant travel. We argued because that wasn't how I was raised. She thought money could buy happiness. I knew better. One night at home, I wanted to call a friend. I tried to hit the directory button on the phone, but I hit redial instead by mistake. I was shocked to discover that I had unwittingly dialed a law firm. I quickly hung up and researched them on Google. They were a firm specializing in divorce. I ran into the bathroom and vomited on the floor before I reached the toilet. After drinking a ton of ginger ale to settle my stomach, I sat down listening to a recording of my late aunt singing folk songs to calm me down and tried to come up with a plan. I had suspicions, but no proof. I drove to Best Buy and bought several voice-activated recorders. I placed them near telephones around the house and another under Shirley's car's driver's seat. Since the Apple tracking device notified people of their presence, they would do me no good. Instead, I bought another Apple iPhone and an external battery pack. I shut off the sound and notifications. I turned on the Find My app and placed it in my wife's truck, under the spare tire. I would now be able to track my wife's car in real time. I was still hoping that my wife had dialed the wrong number and had no intention of speaking to a divorce lawyer. Of course, I still believed that my uncle's favorite teams, the Philadelphia Phillies, would win this year's pennant race, while the Eagles would win the Super Bowl in the same year, which tells you how removed I was from reality. The next day, my hopes and dreams were destroyed by tracking her location. I discovered that she and Stan met up in a motel. I listened to the tape recorder hidden in my wife's car and learned that she was on her way to the motel. She told Stan that according to her lawyers, she would be entitled to half of our rather modest savings, but receive none of my inheritance and a divorce. This infuriated her. If I died, however, she explained to Stan, she would inherit it all. I could almost see the wheels turning in her head, and Stan soon joined in on the homicidal dream. To give the devils their due, they came up with an ingenious plan. Stan would buy a small handheld electric sea scooter. Then he, his scuba gear, and the scooter would be hidden on the boat the next time I took it out alone. When we were miles out to sea, he would emerge from his hiding place, shoot me with a taser, throw me overboard to drown, leave the back gate to the swim step open as he used the scooter and scuba gear to return to shore undetected. Many sailors drown while trying to take a leak from the back of the boat. They are found with their pants down. Stan planned to leave me in that condition in case the Coast Guard found my body, leaving the boat seemingly abandoned. When the Coast Guard eventually found the abandoned boat, they would assume I fell overboard and drowned. Then Stan referenced the movie The Godfather. Like Luca Brasi, your husband will soon sleep with the fish, and they both laughed. I thought it was a great plan. Clearly these two are not stupid, just evil. I was filled with a rage I hadn't felt since Eric beat me up and Susan laughed at me. With those memories and that hatred burning through my soul, I made up my mind on what I had to do. All week I told my wife how excited I was to take out the boat this weekend. I asked if she wanted to come, but hiding a smile, she declined. Saturday morning at 9, I put my newly purchased safety gear in my pockets and pulled my boat out of the yacht club. I turned on the autopilot, get behind the captain's bitch out of sight. I listened and waited. About a half hour later, when we were about 10 miles out to sea, the cabin hatch opened. From my hiding place I could see Stan, wearing a wetsuit and weight belt, with a taser in his hand. He looked around puzzled because he didn't see me behind the wheel. I jumped up from my hiding place with my safety gear and fired at him with one of the 2 tasers I had bought for cash that week. It failed to work. I didn't hesitate a moment and shot him with my second taser. I had been a Boy Scout and was always prepared. I bought the tasers far away from where I lived and wore a wig as part of my disguise so no one knew I owned them. I didn't use a gun because I didn't want blood on my boat. That evidence could send me to prison. He dropped his taser as he fell onto the floor of the cockpit cabin writhing in pain. I kicked his taser away from him and fired my taser at him 2 more times. I must have a sadistic streak because I felt real joy when I heard his screams. It reminded me of the time I beat up Eric. I dragged him to the stern and pushed him overboard before he could recover from the taser shots. With the weight belt on, he quickly sank. A mile away, I threw all 3 tasers, the sea scooter, and scuba equipment overboard. Back at the marina, I wiped away fingerprints from any place on the boat he might have left them. I spoke to several people whose boats were near mine and shared a few beers. I was calm and happy. If the police interviewed them about me, I would seem innocent. I am almost ashamed to admit that I felt no guilt or remorse. I didn't call the police earlier because I had insufficient proof of their plan. I remembered that the police did nothing after Eric beat me up. I had learned that calling the police would be a waste of time. It was a kill or be killed world. Perhaps I shouldn't have gone out on the boat that day, but since they had informed me of the time and place of their plan to kill me, I refused to give them another opportunity when I wouldn't be on my guard. As for the judicial system, I would only be guilty of first-degree murder if I was caught. I silently entered my home that evening. My wife was watching TV. She had an almost empty bottle of expensive wine next to her. She had a wine glass in one hand and her cell phone in her other hand, waiting for a call from Stan, I assumed. Surprise! I yelled as I walked into the room. She looked up at me, screamed, dropped the wine glass and phone, then fainted. When she came to, I played dumb. I put a cold wet washcloth on her forehead and said all the things a loving, caring husband would be expected to say. Of course, I didn't say a word about what had happened. My wife just looked strangely at me all evening. Late that night, Stan's wife called and asked if either of us had seen him that day. We both told her we hadn't. Apparently, Shirley and Stan had been very discreet, because no one knew they were having an affair and the police never questioned either of us. I stopped eating anything my wife prepared, because I was afraid she'd poison me. I spent most of my time away from her on alleged business trips. I never told her where I was going or when I'd be back, despite how often she asked. I did that for my safety so she couldn't plan another ambush, and it had the added benefit of driving her crazy. Of course, I rewrote my will, leaving her only $10,000 if she didn't contest my will. I never even thought of hurting my wife. I still loved her. I know, I live in a dreamland. Remember, I'm still a Phillies and Eagles fan like my uncle. A month later, I filed for divorce. I own nothing. Our house, the boat, and cars were all owned by the trust set up by my aunt and uncle. So, Shirley would get nothing. Even though I was not legally obligated, I offered her $100,000 if she immediately got out of my house, didn't contest the divorce, and waived alimony. Her lawyer negotiated me up to $250,000, and I walked away a free man. I felt bad for Stan's innocent wife. I paid her an extravagant $100,000 for Stan's client list. She was grateful and I felt good about it. We never dated, though in truth I was attracted to her, but I couldn't date the widow of a man I'd killed. My aunt and uncle would have been ashamed of me if I did. I sold the boat after the divorce. It held memories that I needed to forget. Shirley still hung around the yacht club dining room. Eventually she started dating a mere millionaire, which was quite a step down for me financially. Someone sent him an anonymous letter warning him to make sure she received nothing in his will or he might be in danger. Shortly after that they broke up. One night at a yacht club dance, Shirley came over and pulled me onto the dance floor against my will. She looked beautiful and was wearing a skin-tight dress. The dress was so tight that when I put my right hand on her back, I could feel the tiny tape recorder hidden there. She said that she knew I killed Stan. I faked surprise, told her she was insane, and walked away. I never again saw her. 2 years later, I attended the funeral of one of my uncle's friends and coworkers. Missy was also there. I have last seen her 2 years ago at her dad's funeral, but she was understandably too upset to say more than hello. Now the 5-year difference in our ages was irrelevant. She had almost as much money as I did, so I wasn't afraid she'd murder me, which unfortunately was an enormous fear from which I still suffered. We went out for coffee after the funeral and dinner 3 nights later, and then every night after that. She told me how impressed she had been that my family didn't let all that money go to their heads and change them. The money had destroyed her family and put a target on her back for every gold digger in town. She'd had her heart broken more than once by guys who thought they had hit the jackpot with her and viewed her only as a lifelong meal ticket. The next month I took her out on my new boat for the weekend and asked her to marry me. When you know it's right, you know. 10 years later, on an average Sunday morning, we cuddled together in an overcrowded bed with our 2 children and one spoiled, overindulged golden retriever, Cooper, who insists on sleeping in the middle of the bed so he can lick any face that comes close to him. Dear listeners, we have a special shout out for the incredibly talented Ronald Birds. This story is one of his amazing creations. Please share your thoughts in the comment section. If you enjoyed Ronald's story, be sure to explore more of his literature on Amazon. We've added links to his work in the description box below, so you can easily dive into his captivating storytelling.